Greetings, viewing audience. I'm Vince Solis. I am the president of Brazosport College, and I am the host of Chomp Talk, which is a podcast where we discuss all things BC related. Today, we have a criminally good show where we're going to discuss our criminal justice program and our law enforcement academy. And today, we have with us Mr. Danny Morgan and Mr. Chris Mazzino. Gentlemen, welcome to the podcast.
Welcome. Thank you.
Morning.
How are you guys?
Good.
Doing well.
You guys
Yes,
ready
sir.
to do this?
Yes, sir.
Absolutely.
This is an exciting topic. You know, a lot of people interested in criminal justice and law enforcement, and we're going to cover all kinds of things related to what you all do for BC, but you've also got some storied careers in the field, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And we'll start off with a real general question. Just tell us a little bit about your background in law enforcement and what brought you to BC. Danny, we'll get started with you.
Sure. My background actually started in criminal justice in 1992. I took my very first criminal justice class here at Brazosport College.
Okay.
At the time, I did not know that was the career field I'm going to be headed towards, but I enjoyed it. It was very interesting. Went to Sam Houston State University, graduated from Sam with a degree in criminology and corrections. Took on my first full-time job in the profession.
What was your first full-time job, Danny? What did you do?
I was a county probation officer,
Okay.
actually. I worked for county probation here in Brazoria County. I was there for about 4.5 years. And I supervised people who had been convicted of misdemeanor and felony offenses.
Okay.
From there, I took on a job as a state parole officer. The titles may sound almost identical, but there are different roles and responsibilities based on those titles. I served as a state parole officer for about 2.5 years. From there, I took on a career as a federal probation officer
Okay.
for the Southern District of Texas. My office was located in Houston. And really enjoyed the job. I was there for 22 years, 2 months, and I retired about maybe 4 years ago.
Okay.
Very fascinating job. Dealt with all types of offenders. As I stated, my degree was in criminology and corrections. So in that particular field, we were interested in why people commit crimes,
Right.
what types of crimes people commit, and where crimes are committed. Things
So,
of that
Danny, when
nature.
you retired, when you retired from that field, you came straight to BC?
In a full-time capacity. I did.
Okay.
I've always worked here at the college,
did.
going back as far as 1997 as an adjunct
Right.
instructor,
Okay.
and I teach criminal justice and sociology full-time.
Well, we're
basis.
glad that you're here. You got an interesting career that we're going to talk more about.
Sure.
Chris, Law Enforcement Academy. So tell us a little bit about your background and how did you get from, being an officer to where you're at now?
Well, so I'm career law enforcement, and I too have been in since 1992. I was 20 years old at the time, and I started out. I was managing a pool supply store. I'm originally from Friendswood, Texas.
Okay.
And so I'm working at Bay Area Pools and Spas there in Friendswood, Texas. And the DARE officer that was assigned to my high school when I was there, because I'm only 2 years out of high school at this point, come in to buy something or some chemicals for his hot tub or his jacuzzi or something like that. And he and I got to talking, and law enforcement was actually my second choice of careers. I wanted to be an airline pilot initially. But,
There you go.
that was a different path. So he comes in to buy some chemicals for his jacuzzi, and we got to talking, and he offered to take me on a ride along. So I went, and the rest is history. And
You
so
got hooked.
I did. I was hooked. I just and really what hooked me about that is it wasn't an action-packed kind of thing. Friendswood was a pretty quiet town at the time. And but what appealed to me about it was kind of like the freedom, the ability to interact with people out in the community, and it just spoke to me, I guess.
How long
And
were you
so,
an officer?
I've been in 31 years, 2 months as of today. Yeah, and I'm still active in the
Still
community.
active.
Yes, sir.
Right. That is awesome. Well, let me ask you a little bit about this. So you kind of landed in your jobs, almost serendipitously, right? You kind of somebody, coached you, kind of give you insights to it. What did you most enjoy about your job? So, Chris, I'll start with you. What do you most enjoy about being a law enforcement official?
I love being outdoors. And so I just, at the time, like I said, I was 20, almost 21 years old, and I didn't really see myself working indoors or in an office type job. I like to be out. I was active, I was a little younger then. But
As we all were.
right, I like to drive. I like to drive around, and just kind of like the freedom of being able to roam. And I understood pretty early on that a lot of it is not just waiting for a call to be dispatched to you, but it's kind of what you make of it. So I enjoyed the kind of the proactivity of being able to make of that what I wanted to. And so I just kind of found that spot where I was in my life at that time, and just capitalized on it ever since then.
And you've enjoyed the job, the
I have.
career, the profession.
And granted, it's not all sunshine and roses. I mean, law enforcement can be a very challenging and sometimes ugly and horrific situation. But our communities, they need good men and women to be able to deal with that for them.
And we're going to come back to that piece right now. Danny, tell us a little bit about you.
I truly enjoyed the work that I did at working for the government, not only on the federal level, but the state and county as well. Like Chris, I'm a field guy. There's two phases to my line of work. There's field supervision and there's investigations. I've worked both, but I truly enjoy being in the field more so. What we do is we supervise individuals. We check on them. I may go to their homes, their employment, administer drug tests to see if they've tested for drug use. So the job or career has many facets.
Right.
One of those is being in the field, and that's what I truly enjoyed the most. Working in Houston, our territory was North Houston, South Houston. I think we have maybe 8 counties. Our district goes as far north as Madisonville, or south as Brownsville, Laredo. And we have offices in each one of those divisions. But field work is my thing. I could be in the field all day, all night.
Well, it sounds like, for those students that are, or potential students that either want to do law enforcement or criminal justice, and to our viewing audience, we've got just a wealth of information, knowledge, wisdom, and experience between Chris and Danny with their many years of service in the profession. This is the kind of faculty member that you get in the programs, teaching and working with our students. It's not just about technical information that you receive in the textbooks and in the pedagogy of the classes. You get real world experience because they're still active in their field. So let's talk a little bit about students or potential students and some of the things that they need to be prepared for or that they need to be thinking of as they think about a career in law enforcement. Chris, you and me and Danny, we've had discussions, about things like, having good credit or having a clean social media presence, being physically active. What are the things, if you could take Chris Mazzino from right now and go back to early 1990s and say, these are the things that you need to have right now to have a really good career in law enforcement, what are the things that potential new students need to be thinking about? What words of wisdom do you both have for our future students?
I think the ability to communicate with any audience that you're in front of, in all levels, whether, from children all the way up to executive level professionals, just the ability to communicate with those people. And sometimes the ability to communicate is the ability to communicate in terms that those folks will understand. But some of our younger folks these days, either haven't been in positions to have those kinds of conversations with such a wide-ranging audience. They've been somewhat limited in their public interactions. So law enforcement is a very public-facing type occupation that requires excellent communication skills. So I would put that probably up near the top. It's just a good personal disposition and the ability to communicate.
That's one of the top skills that is helpful for the position.
Agreed.
What about things that they can be doing, Chris, in terms of monitoring for example, we talked a little bit about credit and social media. You want to talk a little bit about this, or Danny, either one of you want to talk about this?
Sure. So as far as the credit goes, they have to be in good standing. Now, I'm speaking from experience. When I applied for the feds, they did a background investigation that lasted 9 months.
So for students or potential students listening, it's different when you apply for a federal job. They have got different requirements, a different level of scrutiny.
Sure.
Things like credit will potentially impact
Right.
someone who's interested in becoming, say, for example, an FBI agent.
Absolutely. And that's the credit issues, being in good standing with that. That's in an effort not to be compromised. And they'll tell you all day long during the background investigation, hey, we want to know this because we don't want you to become compromised when you work in any type of federal investigation.
They also have, I guess, lots of applicants for these. They're highly coveted positions. So You want to make sure that
Absolutely.
it's not just what you bring to the table in terms of your personal attributes, but you want to make sure that your background is
Right.
also as as stable as possible.
Absolutely. That's very important during the background investigation. Social media is also important.
So, what are some of the
Being in,
things on social media? Because social media obviously is a very powerful tool. Students use it all the time.
sure.
What are some of the what are some of the do's and don'ts?
So, negative postings or definitely a don't. And that could mean anything, being intoxicated and having
Reckless
it.
behavior, driving
Absolutely.
fast, doing
Sure.
donuts.
All those things are just, they don't look good when you're actually going through a background investigation. I know social media wasn't as popular, or when went through my background investigation, my background investigator went door to door in my neighborhood and
A
talked to
little bit
every
different,
neighbor
yeah.
that I actually that was on my street there. But yes, there is some don'ts when it comes to social media, and that's, you've just stated a few of them. It's very important.
Let me ask this, Chris. So I dealt with a student once who had some really interesting feedback. So this was an inverse kind of situation. This was a top student, did everything right, had everything you could possibly imagine in terms of having it together, so to speak, for their future. And one of the things that they wanted to do is they wanted to be, I believe it was, they wanted to go to the FBI or one of these federal law enforcement agencies. And one of the things that they told her about her social media, which I found fascinating, was what she wanted to do, I guess, was do like deep undercover, like that was kind of her what she aspired to. And one of the feedback points that she got was, "Hey, clean up your social media from the perspective that she had all these awards. She was like the top student, the best student. She had this accolade, that accolade, And they're like, it's going to be hard for someone to believe that you're, in that way
Right.
because you're over here this top student. So cleaning up that social media can mean a lot of different things, right? Depending on what you want to go into.
I agree with that. And part of what you're saying is, things like that could potentially compromise the individual's
Sure, if you're
identity,
doing deep, yeah.
and so we tell them, so we catch them in the law enforcement academy as they're transitioning from whatever walk of life they're in before entering law enforcement. And so one of the many things that we tell them on their orientation day and during the recruitment process is start combing through your social media and clean up anything that needs to be cleaned up. They have to take on a different way of thinking. And part of that is like most other professions, law enforcement has a very, I don't want to say strict, but a very formal code of ethics about it. And so we have, as law enforcement officers, we have expectations of our behavior, even in our private lives. So it's not the kind of occupation where you can be one way at work and one way in your private life. And so even our private lives are sometimes under the microscope or subject to scrutiny when it comes to things like various behaviors and things like that. It's like, police officer makes an arrest for driving while intoxicated, and a defense attorney then enters into evidence a bunch of social media photographs of the police officer driving while intoxicated from videos on their social media. So things like that, we encourage them, start thinking a different way. And basically, the overarching principle is this something that you would expect a police officer to do or not do in that case? And if the answer is yes or no, well, then let that start to kind of govern your choices moving forward.
So, Chris, let me ask this. So, you obviously work a lot with students in terms of not just coaching them for the career that they're going to be heading into. And you do the same with them, Danny. You're giving them this experience or this taste of an experience of what it's going to be like. What kind of advice or how do you coach a student through maybe at the academy or maybe in some of the classes that you're dealing with, Danny, this concept of you're on 24/7? How do you provide that level of self awareness that you as a police officer, a lot you're held to a much higher standard by society. It's not just what you hold of yourself, but people expect the men and women in uniform to conduct themselves a certain way, to be above beyond reproach, to to be the people that are going to come in and save the day. All
right.
these things that come with it. How do you work in a situation where mental health is so important to kind of help that officer, kind of provide that work-life balance, knowing that they're on to, especially if people know that you're a police officer, like the neighbor next door, hey, Chris, I got this situation, I got that. I mean, they see you in uniform, you guys are on all the time. So how do you balance that with the students? What are some of the techniques that you use to kind of coach students through?
I agree that balance is a good word to use. Our students, our program is regulated by the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement. So there is a statutory set of standards that have to be met before we can enroll someone into our Law Enforcement Academy program. One of those standards is a psychological evaluation that has to use two different instruments. One is to measure personality, and the other is to measure psychopathology. And so part of that, I think character is kind of the word I want to land on. Is like somebody, if they sort of have that within them to begin with, then we've got something to work with. But to try to shape that in its absence would be pretty challenging. And a lot of times the psychological evaluation will zero in on some of those traits in an.
And those are vetted norms, standardized, examinations that have been around a long time.
They
So
are, and they're evolving too. And so by Commission on Law Enforcement statute, we as the program have to designate the provider. We can't just send them to anyone. So the providers that we use in the academy are folks that we know who have been evaluating law enforcement or other public safety type candidates for a very long time that have a specific methodology for those kinds of occupations.
Because you said something about, these examinations evolving, but the world of law enforcement, in whether it's a criminal justice program or law enforcement academy, has changed so much over the last few years. I think probably more change has come in the last 10 years than all the years preceding the last 10 years that we've seen changes in law enforcement. Danny, what are some of the things that you're seeing in your field in terms of what has changed in the world of criminal justice over the last several years? What are some of the things that are evolving?
Cybercrime is big.
Huge.
It's growing in numbers, the number of cases that are being investigated regarding cyber crimes. Mortgage fraud, there was on the rise
It's
there
a
for
big
some
one.
time
Yep.
as well. These crimes, and as AI takes hold of every aspect of our society as well, I believe we'll see more crimes related to internet-based crimes. Identity fraud is another one as well. So these are some things that have offenses that has really surfaced over the past 5, 10, 15
Yeah.
years, and I think they're going to be around a long time.
Yeah, the ruses and the cons that are being used are really, really sophisticated. I mean, to your point of, voice animation, voice
Sure.
duplication, synthesizing of the voices. You get the calls saying grandpa, grandma, and they're targeting somebody elderly because,
Absolutely.
they know that that a lot of, folks, and it happens to all of us. We get older and we kind of have less use in our lives or,
Right.
or less adjustment to the technology. All of a
Right.
sudden you hear your grandkid on the phone saying, "Hey, I need $500," and they send them out, and that money's gone. So it's just an evolving world in the world of crime. What about in the world of policing, Chris?
So-
What's changing?
I see it as kind of a leapfrog effect. And what I mean by that is that, we've got kind of like the set of laws and this, that, and the other, and then you start to see crimes that are trying to, work around those laws. So we see new kinds of crime like cybercrime, AI crime, and things like that. So then law enforcement then has to find a way to combat that. And then it's this kind of this leapfrog effect. And so I agree with Danny 100% that things have changed in the terms of technology and investigative techniques and things like that. Very much.
So then how do you, because you've got two different programs. You've got one that is the classroom perspective on the criminal justice side, and then Chris, you obviously have the Law Enforcement Academy working in these spaces. How do you guys prepare students in these different fields once they're here? The student is successful, they apply, they get into the program, they're going to be a police officer, they're going to be a sociologist or a criminologist. What are the things that you're doing in your pedagogy, in your classes? You talk a little bit about technology. You guys got some pretty cool tools, right, to use.
Yes, we do.
What are some of the things that you use to prepare students for this kind of environment, for the real world that's happening right now?
So our program is designed around a prescribed curriculum that we've added an immense amount of things to, because for us, it's more than just, state accountability on a licensing exam pass rate, et cetera, et cetera. What we're really trying to do is produce a good, solid police officer candidate, because that's what our communities. And so one of the fortunate things about the Law Enforcement Academy is I have a staff of 26 people that are our adjunct instructors in the academy, that almost all of which are working law enforcement professionals from our law enforcement agency partners in our area. And so our students have an opportunity through the duration of their journey to make good contacts and networks and apply for jobs and even become employed with those agencies even before they graduate. So the relationship that we facilitate between our students and our prospective employers, I think is enormous.
Danny, what about on the criminal justice side?
On the criminal justice side, what I try to provoke, if uh, um, the real world experience in working in jobs like probation, parole.
Mhm.
Sure, we can offer the textbook material
Right.
in theory, but there's nothing like practical experience being out there. And that's what I try to bring to the table when I'm teaching my classes. I try to share that real world experience with them, something that I've experienced over my career. Another thing I try to emphasize is internships. If I can get a student to take on an internship for 1 semester, that'll earn them 3 academic credit hours and a wealth of experience with whatever agency they're working or doing an internship with. It could be a police department, probation office. That's what I try to offer the students to get them prepared after graduation as to what they're going to be faced with in the real world.
We talk about the real world, and one of the things that has become more prevalent, unfortunately, are some of these very jarring kind of crimes that take place. For example, mass shootings. And we've seen situations where the state has really uh, integrated the responses with school districts, with campus safety plans, and working to help ensure, to the best possible ability that we have, the safety of the people that come to our campus, whether it's college or K-12 or any entities where parents are entrusting organizations with their most sacred treasure, which is a family member, right? Sending their kids to school. We've talked a little bit about some plans for the future, Chris, where because of the kind of training that you and Danny can do, along with all of these adjunct experts that we have on campus, and I would imagine between the 30 or so individuals that you have working as a unit, you've got hundreds of years of experience combined just
Agreed.
because they've been in the field so long. We've talked a little bit about some of our plans for the future in terms of training and being part of how we can provide high-level training to K-12 officers so that, God forbid, if something ever happens, they've got all the tools that they need, the expertise that they need, the response that they need to have in a situation like that. You want to talk a little bit about some of the things we've been talking about, Chris, with your plans for that?
By statute, every peace officer in the state, and there's a little more than 80,000 actual licensees on the peace officer side in the state of Texas. The Commission on Law Enforcement in the last, I guess, as a result of the last legislative session, a mandate came out that every peace officer in the state has to have a baseline active shooter 16-hour worth of course. That's a baseline, and then 16 hours of active shooter training every 2 years thereafter. And so while that's good, the challenge presented with mandating that training are two things. One, it's a mandate, so people don't take kindly to mandates. And the other is that they landed on a very specific brand and a very specific curriculum of training, which is a bit problematic because of the training provider or who actually brands that training. Where we are fortunate here at the Law Enforcement Academy here at Brazosport College is that we are able to administer that specific curriculum training without having to go through the normal channels of ordering equipment and getting supplies and things like that because we have them here.
Right. So just to your point on that, it kind of goes to strategic planning, right? A couple of
Agreed.
years ago, you came to me and said, "Hey, we need some equipment if we want to do this high level kind of training. Here's what the investment dollars are going to be." And I believe at the time it was what,
It was
57.
about 56,000.
Yeah, 57.
Yes.
I remember the number correctly, right? Because when you're having to make decisions about how you invest resources and dollars, and then you told me about this vision, this plan. I said, well, what do you get for 56? You can train people at the highest levels because we've got all the tools, right? So that was the impetus at that point. But now fast forward to this required training, we're one of the few people or few organizations that have access to this high level
We are
equipment.
way ahead of the game. We are way ahead of the game. And so going back to that conversation that you and I had, the training that's required now, we were actually doing several years before it actually became mandated. And so, like, trying to look forward, like you said, is kind of what prompted me to seek that conversation with you. It's worked out wonderfully.
That's great. I'm glad that we're able to provide those kinds of resources for the community. And the plan is moving forward as we think strategically is providing those at no cost so that we have people come into campus to get the kind of training that we have available. So I'm glad that you guys are doing that. Let's talk a little bit about community policing and all the folks that are going into this field, whether it's through criminal justice and or through the law enforcement academy. What are your just philosophical components on community policing and or community involvement? How do you teach that to the students in the program, Danny? I mean, how do you guys emphasize the need to have those good relationships, having that accessibility, that availability? So
Sure.
how do you guys work through that?
Community policing, it's been around a long time, and those are topics that we actually teach. Those topics are stated in our textbooks. We actually teach them. It's very important, I think, on every level. It's county level, state level, municipal level, federal level, to have the community contact connections. In some cases, when you have a strong community relations with the public, that's how some crimes are solved.
Right.
In many cases, I can't overemphasize how important it is to have that strong community relations between police and the community. In some places, it's needed more than others. There's been some negative attention in the media based on the lack of, I should say, police and community relations. And I think once we see that area improve, I think we're going to have a better police force, and I think we're going to have a better community as well.
Chris, what about on the law enforcement academy side?
So, community policing, what I would say about that is I agree with Danny. It has been around. And so, like, if you look at the history of policing, we've gone through several what I would call eras. And starting in about the 1980s, when we kind of moved into what we now consider the community policing eras. Community policing is not a division of a police department. It's not a program. It's a philosophy. It's a way of thinking. It's a philosophy by which the law enforcement agency wants to partner with its community. So the police are the community and the community are the police. Not that we expect community members to go and confront crime and things like that, but really opening the channels of communication is probably up at the top of where that partnership is really valuable. It's like there are only so many law enforcement officers out there on the streets. And what you see, the front-facing part of the police department is the uniform patrol division. There's a lot of things that are going on in the background to make a law enforcement agency function. But what most everyone sees is that uniform patrol division. And so, and as with anything else, there's plenty of challenges with community policing. It's like the community has to want to be involved and has to want to have their community a safer place to live and work and go to school, et cetera. And in today's age, like when he mentioned cybercrime, privacy is huge among people. And some people just don't want to get in, either don't want to get involved or don't want to, or they feel like, well, if it's happening over there across town, well, it's not my problem over here on this side of town. And so we do see some of that. And I think that is more prevalent the larger the community. Like the smaller the communities, the more tight-knit they might be, where you actually have a true sense of community versus a community or a city of 12,000 individual people who are not really, part of a community, I guess is what I would try to say. That.
So let me ask this. Okay, so let's say you've got one of our recent graduates is out in the field. They're a month into their job, either being a police officer or maybe being a parole officer or probation officer. There's a lot of discussion in the world of law enforcement about how we train people to de-escalate a situation, particularly things, you've got body cams, people have phones going all the time. You've got, the internet has these First Amendment audits and they confront officers and everybody's an attorney at all of a sudden. So it becomes confrontational, right? So how do you work in your respective programs to teach students the art of de-escalation and working through these very difficult situations that doesn't happen every day, but when it does, you don't want it to get to something worse, right? So how do you coach, teach, manage, and make sure that the students that are leaving our programs have these skills when they walk out of here?
So the first thing I want to do is go ahead and give credit back to social media because there's enough stuff of that on
Yeah.
social media that our students watch, and so it's not a foreign concept to them because they've seen,
They see it all the
they
time.
see
Yeah.
it all the time on there. And so, as far as advice that we would give them is like, number one, don't take it personal. It's not you individually that they're trying to do. It's the uniform kind of thing, and that's true in a lot of cases. But to not take it personal, approach things objectively. But we talk about First Amendment auditors, and we have specific curriculum on de-escalation techniques. And part of that involves communication, like I said at the very beginning. And so if we take on somebody that hasn't had a lot of, that's never been kind of in a customer service role in any of the jobs that they've ever had or something like that, it's sometimes difficult because sometimes in order to de-escalate a situation, you first have to confront and establish a command presence with that situation and then order to start de-escalating it. So that can be sometimes challenging, but we have the tools that are prepared to try to teach somebody how to
Kinda
do that.
part science, part art,
Right.
just
Sure.
having to work through those items. Dan, what about in
Yeah.
the world of criminal justice?
Just to add to that, respect is up there pretty high. Communication, and what I mean by communication is not always speaking. Communication could also mean active listening as well. If you're out there active listening to whatever's going on, I think you're going to be able to respond better. You're going to get a better idea of what's going on. Especially as a police officer, as you're rolling up to the scene, you got to have that degree of respect and communication, not just speaking but listening as well.
Yeah, let me ask this question. So, I've always found the world of law enforcement fascinating. First responders, and I'm really proud of the kind of graduates we produce. When you listen to different things, how do you coach the students? I've always been interested in this, Chris and Danny. How do you coach the students to deal with that? You, I show up to work and I know that my day might be a little bit stressful, but by and large, I work with you guys. I work with any number of really great faculty, staff, our students. I'm not dealing with a life and death situation. I mean, it's a different kind of job. But how do you, I guess, work with the students? They're going to show up to every situation could potentially be a life and death situation, a traffic stop,
Sure.
something happening. How do you get them to deal with just on the physical side of what that does? You get all this stress, you get all this cortisol, you get all this, just this reaction that the body has to these stressful situations. And I remember talking to one of my friends who was a law enforcement officer. He was a police officer, and he says, Doc, that's the stuff that'll keep you alive, So
It's true.
how do you work? I mean, how do you teach students to manage that? Because that stress it's a very different kind of stress. My day may be busy and it's stressful in that manner, but it's not the same as, man, am I showing up to something that could be my last, right? So how do you
True.
work? How do you teach students the art of the psychology behind that?
So there's a scale based on that physiology that you mentioned, white, yellow, orange, red, and black, as far as how your body would physically respond to some of these type events. And it can certainly sometimes be a roller coaster where you're coming from a really high stress incident and now you've got to go help somebody get a cat out of a tree or something like that or
Right.
whatever. He's probably the better one to answer that because he teaches our fitness and wellness blocks in the law enforcement academy and also administers our physical fitness program. And he talks about this roller coaster effect on how to keep your body and your emotions kind of in sync to deal with this roller coaster.
Yeah, because it's intense. I mean,
It
you're
can
having
be.
to make life and death situations, and in some instances, right, not all instances, but when you do, you got to be prepared to do it. So, Danny, how do you guys work through these in the classes?
So the key is training. Train, train, train. Whatever you experience out there on the streets, you're going to revert back to training. That's what I've always heard, working through the system over the years of my career, and that's what we got a lot of training. And maybe it was an overkill sometimes, we thought, you know, "Why are we doing this training? I don't think we're ever gonna use this." That was our thought pattern. But I'm here to tell you, so to speak, that what you experience on the streets, you're gonna revert back to training every single time. So training is very important, it's paramount. What you can do personally, we have, scenario-based trainings that we uh, actually do in the police academy. We've designed scenarios, they're tailored to get the heart rate up on some of our cadets going through these trainings. You're going to need an outlet. What has always worked for me is working out. Now, I don't apply that to everybody, but do something, whether it's walking, weightlifting, something to, you're going to need an outlet.
Something that clears the mind.
Absolutely. Something you can go back, kind of reset at the end of the day and get back in the fight the next day.
And
The
do it
training
over.
is key. Training is very important. I cannot stress that enough.
So speaking of training in the classes, a new student comes to one of our programs. They're either going to do CJA or they're going to do the Law Enforcement Academy. What are some of the courses that, we'll start with you, Chris. What are some of the things that a student who gets accepted to become a member, a cadet in the Law Enforcement Academy, what are some of the courses that they're going to take? What are they going to learn in your academies? And you have two academies. You have one that is evening, one is during the day. So they're a little bit different in terms of the sequence, but they get taught the same material. What are some of the things that they're going to learn in the Law Enforcement
So
Academy?
the Law Enforcement Academy is comprised of 43 different subject areas, and some of them are rather small, 2 hours, 4 hours, maybe 8 hours. Some of them are over 40 hours long, just depending on the content. And so both academy platforms that you mentioned, whether it's the day academy or the night academy, they're going to get exactly the same curriculum, just in a different sequence or on a different timeline, like you mentioned. It's spread out across 5 different course numbers for a total of 23 credit hours, but it's actually 43 different subjects. And it ranges from some early history, like how is it that we in the United States, where do we get our methods and traditions from? Well, the answer is they're European methods. This is where we get those traditions from. And so it kind of starts out there. We learn about the Constitution. We learn about criminal law, traffic law, health and safety, drug laws, and just a bunch of different laws. But then it also goes into things like criminal investigative techniques, de-escalation techniques, basic patrol procedures, first aid, firearms. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on.
You ever teach them where the term cop comes from?
The term cop, there's a debate on where the term comes from. So one theory on that is that it's an acronym for Constable on Patrol. And that's a European concept too. But speaking of constable, so constable is actually one of the oldest, or maybe the oldest, actual law enforcement officer designation, coming from London. And the insignia that those individuals, the bobbies as they were called, the insignia that they wore on their uniform were made of copper. And so cop is actually short for copper, which is what they would call a police officer
Yeah,
back
you'd
in
see the big old buttons and the
19th
insignias
century
coming
London.
in. It's fascinating. And what about in the world of CJA? Where, what kind of courses are they going to take?
Starting out, they're going to take the basics, introductory courses, introduction to criminal justice. It's the first course that they're going to take. And, when I teach that course, I try to lay out very plainly what criminal justice is. And typically it's the study of the 3 agencies, law enforcement, courts, and corrections. It's quite different from criminology, where the focus is on why people commit crimes, where crimes are committed, things of that nature. So that's one of the first courses they're going to take when they enter on the CRIJ side. Courts, how the courts operate. We have different facet of courts, from municipal courts all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. So they're going to learn about the different courts that are in play when it comes to enforcing our criminal laws. Corrections, that's a field I'm most in tune with, and that could mean many things. That could mean our penal system, probation, parole. Those fall under the corrections umbrella, if you will. In law enforcement, of course. So we teach all facets, but the very first courses they're going to take is going to be introductory, the courts and how the courts work, and community supervision courses.
Yeah, it's interesting. The world of law enforcement has changed so much, but a lot remains. Those basic fundamental components about communication, working with one another, understanding what the role is, how to take care of yourself. Those basic tenets still continue to be paramount in what you all teach.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and to back
Foundational
you up on
courses.
that, it's
Sure.
like we mentioned some evolving types of ways to commit crimes and things like that. But a couple of things that have not changed over the decades and even the centuries are the Constitution, for one, and just as a society, what we would probably agree on, just basic concepts of right and wrong, have
Right.
not changed.
The rule of law.
Absolutely.
That's right.
Let me ask this. So you've mentioned a couple of times why people commit crimes. So if you had to say, here are your top 2 or 3, what are the things that what leads someone to create a crime? I've always heard that one of them has to do with most people think they won't get caught. I don't know if that's a
Right.
real thing or not,
It
but
is.
yeah, you think you're going to get away with it. If not, you wouldn't do it. So, what are some of the things, Annie?
So I'll start out on the basic level. One of my jobs in this criminal justice career, I was a loss prevention officer. Um, and my job was to seek and find people who were shoplifting, customers who would come in the store. And I actually, I caught a guy shoplifting, elderly guy. He was probably in his mid 60s. And of course, when we catch someone shoplifting, we approach him, we introduce ourselves, and we escort him back to the office, and we confiscate the items that were actually taken. This particular gentleman, I've never met anyone like him. I asked him for his ID. He opened his wallet up, wad of cash that thick. He had every credit card you could name. So I asked this guy, "Why are you doing this?" He shoplifted a jogging suit. I think it cost maybe $25. And his answer to me was, "I just wanted to see if I could get caught." That was his answer to me.
Yeah.
Now, I'm more inclined to believe that the guy had every resource out there he could have paid for this item. He chose not to.
Now,
So-
but are those the anomalies or
Yes,
the
that's
one-offs
one
kinda?
example, of
Yeah.
course. And people commit crimes now on a federal level. I've supervised people who've committed crimes. We've all heard the term white collar
Yeah.
crime.
Now there's a new term coming out, so we'll talk a little
Yeah.
bit about that. White and blue collar crime. So what are the differences?
So white collar crime, they're mainly committed by people who are very respectable in the community. They tend to commit the crime in the course of their occupation.
The Bernie Madoffs of the world.
Yes,
So to speak.
and behind that is greed. A lot of people are just greedy. They're wealthy individuals to begin with,
Just want more.
but they want more, and that gets them into in a lot of trouble
It
when it comes
clouds
to committing
judgment.
crime. Yes, that's absolutely correct.
Yeah,
So greed is one of them. Of course, some people commit crimes just for the thrill of it.
Yeah, sure.
Just for the thrill. Another interesting case. You guys probably remember when the federal building was bombed in Oklahoma. This was
Yeah.
back in '96, I
Tuesday.
believe. Yes, I had the opportunity to actually supervise an individual who was part of that. In the secondary phase, after the bombing of the federal building, these, I guess you could call them thrill seekers. This particular guy wanted to go out to the crime scene. He teamed up with a buddy who was in the military. They rented a helicopter. They flew over the bombing site. That was illegal. And the only way they got caught is anyone who wanted to fly over the bombing site had to get permission from the FBI. They didn't know that, and that's how they got caught. So they were committing crimes just for the thrill of it, just to see if they could do it. So we have all types out there that commit crimes for various reasons.
Yeah, Chris, what about your?
Yeah.
You've been an officer for 30 plus years. What
Yeah.
what have you seen in that
So
time?
I see, crimes being committed sometimes because the opportunity presented itself, and so that's something that we would talk about on the law enforcement end in terms of crime prevention and, trying to, educate community members on how to make yourself what we call a harder target, trim the bushes, leave some lights on, don't, vary your routine and things like that. Always lock your car. Don't leave your keys in your car, kind of thing. Harden yourself as a target to kind of reduce the opportunity. And so you mentioned blue collar crime, and that's kind of some of the rougher, the uglier type of crimes. But sometimes desperation does strange things to
Sure.
people. And so I would say opportunity and desperation is a lot of what we see on the street level as far as the kinds of crimes are committed. Some crimes are specifically intended. Family violence is unfortunately more prevalent than it should be, but that's kind of contained within a family unit to where we don't see that person offending elsewhere except within the family unit kind of thing. So we do see a lot of that, unfortunately.
Chris, what do you think? Not that we would have an answer to this, but just your perspective for both of you. Podcasts, crime shows, shows like CSI. They've just been this proliferation of interest in law enforcement. Kind of we've talked a little bit it's crime time, So
Mhm.
What do you think is causing the fascination with you get these high profile cases and everybody pours in. One of the things that I find really interesting is that everybody's a sleuth and their own
Right.
detectives and they've got their own theories, and that can be harmful to law enforcement in the perspective that And people will, if I'm in there just speculating about something, that can impact an investigation.
Sure.
When you got 200-300 people or more, just chiming in on comments and, well, I saw them this or I did that, and the law enforcement's got to chase all these things down in terms of potential leads. And
That's right.
I mean, what are your thoughts on why this has become so popular in pop culture?
Some of what we do in the Law Enforcement Academy involves undoing things that people see on TV and the shows and things like
Right.
that. It's like it's not really like it is on TV. Sorry.
Yeah.
It is what it is. But like you said, sometimes, and honestly, some people just want to help, or some people just want to feel like they're trying to make a difference. The reality is that sometimes it starts to dilute the investigation to where we start having to chase these rabbits and things like that. And I don't think anyone means any malicious intent when they do that,
Right.
but it does sometimes cause a little bit of an inconvenience if we're chasing things that turn out to not be relevant. But I have to say, too, that a lot of cases have been solved or cracked open because of something that was originally thought to be a meaningless tip turned out to be the one kind of thing. So we're not going to ignore that, but it does sometimes
You got to
get
filter
challenging.
through all the
Right.
noise.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm fascinated, and I'm guilty, pun intended, because I put on a podcast and sit down and I'm like, what did these people get themselves into, And it's fascinating how, someone who is living the life, so to speak, can go from zero to, these heinous crimes, and their lives, the lives of their families, everything gets, the snow globe gets shaken up, and it's no longer the same. So it's fascinating. I guess it's part of the human condition to try to understand, some of these darker sides of our humanity.
Sure.
So, Danny, what about on your end?
I want to mention crimes of passion.
Oh,
That's
that's
a
a
hot
big
one
one.
too. It's some people they lose control of their emotions, and that lands them in hot water as well. I think that's seen in some domestic cases as but yeah, that's social media. It's a blessing and it's a curse as well.
Sure.
So, we police officers use it to their advantage, of course, and going through the process of weeding everything out, it takes time.
I'm amazed at what people will post.
Well,
So
absolutely.
and I would say, because my spouse is a detective at a local law enforcement agency, and I know that she has cracked
oh yeah,
numerous cases because sometimes people want to brag and they want to
people will
post
post it up.
on
Yeah,
social
yeah.
media the things that they stole and things like that. And so she
Or the
definitely
other one
is-
that's out there is, we live in a big, obviously, fishing, hunting kind of community, and
Right.
people will post things that, the game wardens show up all of a sudden. Well, how'd you find me? Well, you posted this picture on
That's
social media. You probably shouldn't have done that,
That's
So
right.
it's just a fascinating world. I want to thank both of you for being on the show today. We could talk for hours about all the things that are going on there. Let's cover some closing thoughts. For students that are interested in a career in either criminal justice and or the law enforcement academy, what are some things that they should know about as we think, how we could prepare them for, coming to find out more information about our programs? What are some things they need to do to prepare as we kind of close out the show today?
So they're welcome to come and consult with us at any time. We have information on the college website that talks about our program and the basic requirements in order to be eligible to enroll. And like I said earlier, like our program is regulated by the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement. So there are some statutory standards that are involved in that. It just basically clean criminal history, 21 or older, must pass a physical and drug screen, must pass a psychological evaluation, and full of other things, very basic things. Standards to become employed at law enforcement agency are sometimes more stringent than that, and that's the agency's discretion on whether to do that. They can visit tcol.texas.gov for more information on what those statutory requirements are. But we welcome, our doors are always open for someone to come and talk to us, and we field those visits quite frequently. Like, what do I need to do to get in the academy? And so part of that involves, like, the academy only enrolls twice per year. So we will do a summer recruitment for classes that start in the summer, and then we'll open the recruiting window again in about September for a full-time daytime class that'll start in January. So it's not a perpetual enrollment. And I will say that the Law Enforcement Academy is not the kind of program that you can, 2 or 3 days before the semester starts, hey, I think I'll go sign up for the police academy. There's about 6 weeks worth of in processing that needs to occur before I can legally declare somebody that's eligible to enroll and send that information to the registrar's office.
So planning is key for anybody who wants to
Agreed.
do the law enforcement.
Very much so, yes.
A little bit different on the CJA side. So on the criminal justice side, Danny, students can take your classes, come in, speak with you or with an advisor.
Absolutely. Just want to echo what Mr. Mazzino said. The door is always open. We're always welcoming students to come in and speak with us about any interest they have in criminal justice or the law enforcement side. I would stress, education, education, education. I know we offer a program for education on educational purpose for law enforcement professionals. So education is key. Any questions that anyone has about the criminal justice program we offer here, I am here, and so is Mr. Mazzino, to answer any questions they may have.
And I appreciate the open door policy that you both have. I've seen you interact with students, and they're really fortunate to have you, to have all of the adjuncts, to have the wealth of information and knowledge to bestow and share with the students in the program. So I want to thank you both for your service. I want to thank you for everything that you do for our students day in and day out. Like I said, I watch you guys interact with our students, and we're really proud of the work that you do. And thank you so much for being part of the team. And with that, viewing audience, we are going to close out this episode of Chomp Talk. And as we always do, we talk about what the president is reading. And I just started reading this book right here. It is by Annie Jacobson. It is New York Times bestseller. It is on global thermonuclear wars and the possibilities that come with it. So for those of us that grew up in the 80s and the 70s dealing with all the things that came with the Cold War, this has kind of become an afterthought. But if you look at this nonfiction work, it is a fascinating perspective on how close we come to creating some difficult situations for humanity in this space. But Annie Jacobson, highly encourage it. I just started reading it. I can't put the book down. It is a really good read on some of the things that could potentially happen if people who don't have good communication skills and aren't connecting and trying to avert these things. But it's a great read. That's what the president is reading right now. So thank you all for being a part of our team. Thank you all for joining us for this episode of Chomp Talk. As with all things BC related, we look forward to bringing you more information about our programs and all the great things that we have for our students at Brazosport College. Thank you for being part of the team.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Yes, sir.